A violent push sends Julian Cole crashing off the Lexington Regency stage, snapping his cane in half. CEO Victoria Brooks screams at him, "Dirty janitor." But this blind man was once a legendary pianist who played for 3 U.S. presidents. After his wife Clara died, he took a cleaning job to survive, only wanting to touch the $250 Bosendorfer piano to remember her. This cruel moment starts his fight against Boston's rich elite to win back his dignity. With angry guards threatening him, and the crowd staying silent, can he prove his worth? How will his music trigger a shocking twist tonight? To know why a blind man found the courage to face an empire tonight, we need to go back a few hours. We need to go back to a life spent softly in the dark. Julian Cole woke up at 4:30 every morning. His small home sat above a laundromat in Dorchester, a working-class part of Boston. The rent was $450 a month. The walls were thin. He could hear pipes groan every time a neighbor turned on hot water. He never needed an alarm clock. His body had learned the rhythm of early mornings years ago, back when he practiced piano scales before the sun rose. Now that same rhythm woke him for a new life. A life of mop buckets and floor wax. He reached for his cane first, always resting by the bed. It was made of old oak wood, smooth from years of use. The handle had worn down into the shape of his palm. It felt like an old friend. His hands told most of the story. They were rough now and cracked at the knuckles. Years of harsh cleaning chemicals had eaten away at the skin. He used one brand that cost $14.50 a bottle. The smell clung to him even after he washed. But if you looked closer, you would notice something strange about those hands. The fingers were long. The tips were flat and wide, like they had pressed down on something for thousands of hours. These were not ordinary hands. These were the hands of a piano player. Before the cleaning job, before the darkness, Julian Cole had a new life. He trained at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, one of the finest schools in the country. He was a star student there, the kind that comes along once in a generation. By the time he turned 30, he had performed for 3 new presidents inside the East Room of the White House. Reporters called him a national treasure. Audiences stood and clapped until their hands hurt. Then came the sickness. A disease slowly destroyed the nerves behind his eyes. Doctors gave it a long medical name, but Julian just called it the thief. It took his sight, over 5 long years, piece by piece, until there was only darkness left. His career ended almost overnight. Concert halls stopped calling. Money ran out fast. The world that once knew his name simply forgot him. Through it all, one person stayed by his side. Her name was Clara. She was his wife, his anchor, and his eyes, when his own could no longer see. She read him letters. She described sunsets he could no longer view. She held his hand through every hard night. Clara passed away on November 12th, 2 years ago. A sudden illness took her fast, leaving him with an emptiness words could not fill. All he had left was her wedding ring, worn smooth and thin, which he kept on a chain around his neck. He remembered the small things most. The way she hummed while she cooked breakfast. The way she always described colors to him in strange, funny ways, calling orange the color of loud laughter. He missed the sound of her footsteps in their kitchen. Grief did not arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet at first, then crashing without warning. Some mornings he forgot she was gone, reaching across the bed out of habit, before the truth settled back in. Friends from church brought him meals for the first few months. Slowly, those visits grew less frequent, the way they always do. People moved on with their own lives. Julian learned to sit with silence. After she died, Julian needed work. Not for pride, just to eat, and to keep the small home they once shared. A friend from church knew someone at a hotel. That is how Julian Cole became a janitor at the Lexington Regency. The Lexington Regency was one of the oldest hotels in Boston. Rich guests walked through its lobby every day. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like glass rain. Marble floors stretched out under polished shoes. Julian's manager was a man named Arthur Vance. Arthur ran a tight schedule and expected silence from his cleaning staff. He treated the janitors like they were part of the furniture, useful but unseen. "Keep your head down and your bucket full," Arthur liked to say. Julian never argued. He simply nodded and went back to work, his cane tapping softly against the marble. Every night, Julian mopped the same long hallways. He learned the building by sound and touch. He knew which floor tiles were loose. He knew which door hinges needed oil. In many ways, he saw more than people gave him credit for. That evening, the hotel buzzed with more energy than usual. The grand ballroom was being prepared for a special event. Brooks Capital Partners, one of the richest investment firms in New England, was hosting its yearly celebration. At the center of the ballroom sat a stunning piano. It was a Bosendorfer Imperial, worth $250,000. Its black wood shined under the crystal chandelier like a mirror. This piano belonged to Victoria Brooks, the CEO of Brooks Capital. She was one of the most strong women in the city, known for her sharp business mind and her love of fine art. Many called her a great supporter of music. Few called her kind. Victoria wore designer heels that clicked loudly against the marble floor. Every step she took echoed through the hallway like a small drumbeat, announcing her arrival before she even entered a room. She checked her watch, then checked it again. The main performer for tonight's event, a pianist named Jean-Pierre, had not yet arrived. Tension crept into her shoulders. At 7:45 that evening, bad news reached her. Jean-Pierre was refusing to play. He wanted $5,000 more than his contract stated, and he would not budge. Victoria's face turned red with anger. She snapped orders at hotel staff, demanding someone fix the problem right away. The ballroom, filled with big guests in tuxedos and evening gowns, began to buzz with confused whispers. Julian was nearby, that whole time, mopping near the edge of the ballroom. He heard the noise, but stayed focused on his work. It was not his place to get involved in the affairs of the rich. Then a hotel technician walked up to the piano to test the sound. He pressed a single key, letting one clear note ring through the room. That single note hit Julian like a bolt of lightning. His body froze fully. His mop stopped moving. For a moment, the busy ballroom disappeared, and he was somewhere else entirely. The tone of that note was perfect, warm and full. It reminded him of a song he and Clara used to hum together on quiet evenings. His chest tightened. His breath caught in his throat. He gripped the handle of his mop tighter, trying to even himself. Old feelings stirred inside him. Feelings he had buried under years of mop water and silence. A small voice inside him whispered that he should walk away. He was just a cleaner now, earning $12.50 an hour. Touching a piano worth $250,000 was not something people like him were allowed to do. Fear crept into his mind, sharp and cold. What if his hands had lost it all? What if 5 years of darkness had stolen his gift along with his sight? He had not touched real piano keys in a very long time. He turned away from the sound, gripping his mop handle, and started walking toward the staff hallway. He told himself it was safer there, safer to stay unseen, like Arthur always wanted. But before he reached the door, someone called out to him. "Mr. Julian, wait." The voice belonged to Marcus, a 19-year-old kitchen helper at the hotel. Marcus was one of the few people who ever really talked to Julian. He was kind, quick to smile, and always curious about the older man's quiet ways. Marcus had once overheard Julian humming a complicated classical melody in the break room, back when he thought no one else was listening. He never forgot the sound. It stuck with him, strange and beautiful. Now Marcus stood in front of Julian, holding something small in his palm. It was an old tuning fork, the kind musicians used to check pitch. He had found it months ago in a box of lost items no one claimed. "I don't know your whole story," Marcus said softly, "but I know you don't belong with these mop buckets. Don't let them take your music away, Mr. Julian." Those simple words landed heavy on Julian's heart. A young man, still finding his own way in the world, somehow saw something in Julian that even Julian had stopped seeing in himself. Julian's fingers wrapped around the cold metal tuning fork. He could feel its weight, small but somehow big. It felt like a key unlocking a door he thought was sealed for good. He took a long, slow breath. Something inside him shifted, quiet but certain. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from the music that still lived inside his chest. At 8:15 that night, Julian stepped out of the shadows near the staff hallway. He walked toward the bright lights of the ballroom, his cane tapping an even rhythm on the marble floor. The room, full of laughter and clinking glasses, slowly grew quiet. Guests turned to stare at the man in the gray uniform moving toward their special piano. Whispers spread through the crowd like a ripple across still water. Julian did not hear the whispers. He was focused only on the sound in front of him, the unseen pull of the piano waiting under the lights. His cane found the edge of the small stage, and he stepped up with care. He reached out and placed his rough, worn hands on the cool ivory keys. For the first time in 5 years, he touched a real piano again. His fingers shook slightly, from nerves, and maybe from joy. Before a single note could leave the keys, quick footsteps stormed across the stage. Victoria Brooks moved fast, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. She reached Julian and shoved him hard, using both hands against his chest. He had no warning and no way to catch himself in time. Julian crashed backward off the small stage, landing hard on the wooden floor below. His old oak cane snapped clean in half under the force of the fall, the broken pieces skidding across the marble. A few guests gasped. Others, uncomfortable but not willing to get involved, simply laughed under their breath at the strange scene going on before them. Victoria stood over him, her chest heaving with anger. She pointed a polished finger down at Julian, her voice sharp enough to cut through the stunned silence of the room. "Who gave a filthy janitor permission to touch this piano?" she shouted, loud enough for every guest to hear clearly. "Look at those hands. They reek of cleaning chemicals. They are only good for holding a rag, not for touching a masterpiece like this." Her words hung in the air, cruel and sharp. Somewhere near the back of the room, a phone camera softly began recording, though no one noticed yet. Julian lay on the cold floor for a moment, feeling the sting of shame more than the pain in his back. He heard soft voices around him, some shocked, some amused, none brave enough to step forward and help. Arthur Vance rushed onto the stage, with 2 large security guards close behind him. His face was pale, with panic, worried about what this scene might cost him, with a client as strong as Victoria Brooks. "Sir, you need to come with us right now," Arthur said sharply, grabbing at Julian's arm. "You are trespassing on hotel property, and you damaged company equipment." The guards moved in closer, their shadows falling over Julian as he tried to sit up. One of them mentioned calling the Boston police, his tone flat and cold, as if this was routine business. Marcus pushed through the crowd before the guards could grab Julian again. He stepped between them, his young frame shaking slightly, but his voice stayed firm and clear. "Leave him alone," Marcus said. "He didn't hurt anyone. He just wanted to play a few notes." Arthur's eyes narrowed at Marcus. "Stay out of this, or you can find a new job tomorrow morning," he warned, his voice low and threatening. Marcus did not move. He stood his ground beside Julian, even though his hands shook with fear. Somewhere deep down, he knew this moment mattered more than his paycheck. Victoria raised a hand, signaling the guards to wait. A strange, cruel smile crept across her face as a new idea formed in her mind. She glanced toward the small crowd, many now holding up their phones. "Wait," she said, loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. "If this man wants to stay employed here, let's see what those hands can actually do." She crossed her arms, looking down at Julian with cold amusement. "Play something. Let's see if there is anything in you besides mop water and excuses." The room fell into an awkward, tense silence. Some guests exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to laugh or look away in embarrassment. Nobody stepped forward to stop what was going on. Julian slowly sat up, ignoring the offered hands of nearby staff. Pride kept him even. He wanted to rise on his own power, not out of pity from strangers who had just watched him get shoved to the ground. Marcus knelt down and picked up the broken halves of the old oak cane. He placed the pieces softly into Julian's hands, his eyes glistening with quiet anger. "You don't have to do this," Marcus whispered close to his ear. "But if you want to, I've got your back." Julian nodded slightly, gripping the broken cane pieces tight in one hand. With his other hand, he reached for the edge of the small stage, feeling his way back up toward the piano bench. He lowered himself onto the bench slowly, his body aching from the fall. Every set of eyes in the ballroom locked onto him, waiting to see what this quiet, broken man might do next. Darkness surrounded him fully, But it was not just the blindness that pressed down on him now. It was the crushing weight of hundreds of judging stares, sharp and unkind. His hands hovered above the keys, shaking harder than before. Doubt crawled into his thoughts like cold water rising around his ankles. Had all those years of silence stolen away his gift fully? He thought about the countless nights he had wondered if he was by now lost. A washed-up man no one remembered, reduced to nothing but a uniform and a mop bucket. For a moment, fear nearly won. His fingers curled back slightly, ready to retreat from the keys entirely, ready to accept defeat in front of everyone watching. Then, softly, he thought of Marcus standing behind him. He thought of the tuning fork still resting in his coat pocket, small and even, like a promise waiting to be kept. Julian pressed down on the first key. The note came out shaky, slightly off pitch, his fingers stiff from years without real practice. A few guests near the front smirked and shook their heads. Someone in the back let out a low whistle, mocking him openly. Victoria folded her arms tighter, a satisfied smile spreading slowly across her lips as she watched him struggle. Julian closed his eyes, though the darkness never truly changed for him. He took one long, deep breath, filling his lungs with the mixed scent of expensive perfume and his own nervous sweat. He let his mind drift back to a warm spring evening in 2018, standing inside the East Room of the White House. He remembered Clara sitting in the front row, glowing with quiet pride as he played for the nation's leaders. He remembered the sound of applause that night, thunderous and warm, filling every corner of that historic room. He remembered feeling, for just a moment, like he truly belonged somewhere big. That memory steadied his shaking hands. His fingers found their rhythm again, slow at first, then building with quiet, growing trust in himself. The stiff, uncertain notes melted away, replaced by something rich and full of feeling. He shifted smoothly into a classical piece by Beethoven, each note clear and deliberate, filling the ballroom with unexpected beauty. Then something changed. The gentle classical melody twisted into something wilder, deeper, and full of raw emotion. His hands moved fast now, weaving in sounds of New Orleans jazz, bold and unafraid. The music grew louder, stronger, almost angry in its passion. It rolled through the ballroom like a storm at last breaking free, after years of being held back. Every guest in the room fell fully silent, forks and glasses lost midair. Even Victoria's confident smile began to fade, replaced by something like confusion, then something like fear. Julian played like a man setting free at all he had buried for years. Every ounce of pain, every quiet night of grief, every unfair moment poured straight out, through his fingertips. Near the final section, his fingers slowed, and the music softened into something tender and personal. This part was not for the crowd. This melody belonged only to Clara. It was a song they had written together long ago, one they hummed on quiet nights, when the world felt too heavy. Now he played it for her, wherever she was, hoping she could somehow hear it. Tears slipped silently from beneath his closed eyes, but his hands never stopped moving, never lost their even, strong rhythm. The final note rang out deep and low, hanging in the air for what felt like for good. Slowly, the sound faded into complete and total silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For 10 long seconds, the whole ballroom stood frozen, caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. Then, from a table near the front, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slow, even, and full of respect, the sound cut through the stunned quiet like a bell. Julian sat perfectly still on the bench, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Something inside him felt lighter now, like a weight he had carried for years had at last been set down. He had proven nothing to Victoria Brooks directly. He had not said a single word in his own defense. But somehow, through music alone, he had took back a piece of himself that felt lost for good. Victoria's face shifted, from shock into something colder and more dangerous. She could feel the room's attention slipping away from her, drawn instead toward the quiet man she had just humiliated minutes before. Jealousy burned through her chest. She had spent years building her image as Boston's greatest supporter of the arts. Now a janitor had stolen the spotlight fully, without even trying. "Enough!" she shouted fast, her voice cutting sharply through the spread-out applause. "This little show is over. Get this man out of my building right now, and call the police." Arthur Vance moved quickly, eager to please his strong client. He grabbed Julian by the arm and pulled him roughly off the piano bench, ignoring the protests rising from a few nearby guests. Julian did not fight back. He allowed himself to be led away, still clutching the broken pieces of his old wooden cane against his chest. He had by now gotten what he truly came for. Marcus tried to step in again. A guard blocked his path firmly, warning him with a hard stare not to interfere any further. The cold Boston night waited just beyond the hotel's grand doors. Julian felt the guard's tight grip on his arm, ready to push him back out into the darkness he had briefly escaped. Just as they reached the edge of the ballroom, a strong voice rang out from somewhere near the center of the crowd. "Stop right there." Every head in the room turned at once toward the voice. An older man stood up slowly from his seat near the front tables, his presence somehow filling the whole ballroom with quiet power. His name was Thomas Aldrich, the former governor of Massachusetts. Guests recognized him right away, and a fresh wave of whispers spread through the crowd like electricity. Thomas walked forward calmly, stepping past stunned guests and confused security guards without waiting. He moved directly toward Julian, his eyes fixed on the blind man, with something close to deep respect. He reached Julian and, to everyone's shock, bowed his head low in respect. Gasps rippled through the ballroom as cameras rose higher, capturing every second of the unexpected moment. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Thomas asked the crowd, his voice even and clear enough for every corner of the room to hear. Nobody answered. Victoria stood frozen near the piano, her before trust in himself fully drained from her face. "This is Julian Cole," Thomas announced, turning slowly to face the crowd. He played piano for 3 United States presidents inside the East Room of the White House. A shared gasp swept through the ballroom. Phones rose higher, capturing the stunned reactions on dozens of wealthy faces that moments ago had laughed at this same man. "I sat in that room in 2018, Thomas continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I watched this man bring a whole room of strong leaders to their feet, with nothing but a piano and pure talent." He turned toward Victoria, his look hardening with quiet disappointment. "And tonight, in my own city, I watched him get thrown to the ground like garbage." Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in years, she found herself fully, without an answer, fully without control of the room. "It is a disgrace," Thomas said firmly, "that a true American legend has to work as a janitor just to survive. People like you throw parties around pianos you barely know." The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Guests who had laughed minutes before now looked down at their shoes, unable to meet Julian's unseeing eyes. News of the moment spread fast, even before the party ended. Reporters near the back of the room began typing quickly, sending updates straight to their editors. Within minutes, phones buzzed across the ballroom. Investors who had trusted Brooks Capital Partners with millions of dollars were seeing the video clips for the first time live from their own tables. One investor stood up first, his face tight with anger. He was a quiet man named Richard Owens, known for backing arts programs across New England. "I cannot be associated with this," Richard said loudly, loud enough for Victoria to hear clearly across the room. "I am pulling my investment tonight." Others followed quickly. One by one, longtime partners rose from their seats, announcing they would withdraw their support from Victoria's Arts Foundation right away. The total losses that night reached $45 million, gone in less than 20 minutes. Victoria stood alone near her special piano, watching her with care-built good name crumble in front of her. Her face turned pale as the reality hit her. Every symbol of power in that room, the piano, the chandeliers, the guest list, fast meant nothing at all. Arthur Vance softly let go of Julian's arm, stepping back as if the man in his grip had fast become someone he did not recognize. His before trust in himself disappeared fully. Moments ago, The guards were ready to drag Julian outside. Now they stood awkwardly to the side, unsure what to do in front of the cameras. Julian stood softly in the middle of it all, still holding the broken pieces of his old cane. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply waited, calm as ever, in the eye of the storm he never meant to create. Thomas Aldridge placed a gentle hand on Julian's shoulder, guiding him a few steps away from the chaos still going on near the stage. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked softly, his before strong tone now gentle and full of concern. Julian nodded slowly. "I am now," he said softly. "For the first time in a long while, I actually am." Victoria at last found her voice again, though it came out shaky and small compared to her before sharp tone. She walked toward Julian, her designer heels no longer clicking, with trust in himself. I did not know who you were," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I had known." Julian turned his head slightly toward the sound of her voice, his look calm but firm. "Would it have mattered," he asked softly, "if I had just stayed a janitor?" Victoria had no answer. The question hung heavy in the silent ballroom, and everyone present understood exactly what it meant. She reached into her purse, pulling out a checkbook, with shaking hands. "Please, let me make this right. Name any amount. I can fix this." Julian shook his head slowly. "This was never about money," he said. "It was never about your piano either. I just wanted to remember my wife for a few minutes." His words landed heavier than any amount of money could have. Several guests nearby lowered their heads, ashamed of how easily they had laughed along before that night. Marcus stood close by, watching the whole scene with quiet pride. He had believed in Julian before anyone else in that room ever did, and now the whole city was learning the truth alongside him. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, introducing herself as the new dean of the Boston Academy of Music, a school still being built downtown. Her name was Dr. Elaine Ford. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "our academy would be honored to have you join us. Not as a janitor, but as our honorary artistic director." Julian's look softened at the offer, though he remained quiet for a long moment, letting the words settle fully into his mind. "I would be teaching young musicians?" he asked, with care, wanting to know exactly what she meant. "Yes," Dr. Ford answered, "especially the ones who come from nothing, like you once did. The ones the world tends to overlook." A small, real smile crossed Julian's face for the first time that night. It was not the smile of a man seeking revenge. It was the smile of a man finding purpose again. "I accept," he said simply, his voice even and sure. Applause rose again, through the ballroom, warmer and more honest than the before spread-out clapping. This time, even some of the guests who had laughed before joined in, their faces red with quiet shame. Victoria stood off to the side, watching the celebration form around a man she had tried to throw out just an hour before. Her empire, built on image and money, fast felt hollow and small. Security guards who once towered over Julian now stepped aside respectfully, letting him pass freely through the crowd that had gathered to shake his hand. Arthur Vance approached softly, his before harsh tone fully gone. "Mr. Cole, I am deeply sorry for how you were treated tonight," he said, unable to meet Julian's unseeing eyes. Julian simply nodded, accepting the sorry words, without holding on to anger. He had spent years learning that bitterness only weighed down the person carrying it. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall over the streets of Boston, soft and even against the old stone buildings. Julian stepped out through the hotel's grand doors, Marcus walking closely beside him. He held the broken pieces of his old oak cane in one hand, not willing to throw them away just yet. They were a reminder of how far he had come in just a single night. "You did it," Marcus said, grinning widely as they walked together down the wet sidewalk. "You really did it, Mr. Julian." Julian smiled softly, tilting his face up to feel the cool rain against his skin. "We did it," he corrected softly. "I would not have walked onto that stage without you." Marcus laughed softly, shaking his head. "I just handed you a tuning fork," he said. "You handed me more than that," Julian replied. "You reminded me that I still mattered, even when I had lost it myself." They walked together in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of rain filling the empty streets around them. For the first time in years, Julian did not feel unseen. He thought of Clara then, picturing her soft smile the way he always remembered it. He liked to believe she was watching him somehow, proud of the courage he had at last found. The following weeks brought many changes to Julian's quiet life. News stations across the country picked up his story, calling him a symbol of hidden dignity and unstoppable talent. He began teaching piano lessons twice a week at the new Boston Academy of Music. His students were young and eager. Many of them reminded him so much of his own younger self, back before the world had ever heard his name. He never forgot where he came from. Every lesson began the same way, with a simple reminder to his students: true talent never needs to prove itself loudly. Victoria Brooks later stepped back from her role at Brooks Capital Partners. She chose instead to fund scholarships for young musicians from working-class families across Boston. Some called it guilt, others called it growth. Either way, it was her own quiet attempt at redemption, one check at a time. Julian never asked for an Sorry Words tour or public recognition beyond what had by now happened. He simply returned to what he loved most, sharing music with anyone willing to listen and learn. Sometimes, late in the evening, he would sit alone at the Academy's piano after his students had gone home. He would play Clara's songs softly, letting the notes drift through the empty hallways. He kept the broken pieces of his old oak cane in a small glass case near his office door. It stood as a quiet reminder of the night it all changed for him. Marcus visited often, now studying music production part-time, while still working at the hotel. Their friendship had grown far beyond that single dramatic evening at the Lexington Regency. Word of Julian's story spread through Dorchester too. Neighbors who once passed him, without a glance, now stopped to say hello. Children on his street asked to hear him play, and he never once said no. The laundromat owner below his home framed a newspaper clipping about him, hanging it proudly near the front window. Julian laughed softly when Marcus described it to him, still not fully used to being seen. He kept his same small home above the laundromat, refusing offers to move somewhere grander. It held too many memories of Clara to ever leave behind. Some things, he decided, mattered more than money ever could. Julian Cole no longer walked through the world unseen. Though his eyes remained for good dark, the world had at last learned to see him clearly in the fullest sense of the word. He had spent years believing his gift was gone for good, buried under grief and quiet suffering. That single night proved otherwise, in front of hundreds of strangers who would never forget what they witnessed. In the end, Julian did not need Victoria's sorry words, her money, or her piano to prove his worth. He only needed his hands, his memory of Clara, and the simple courage to sit down and play. His cane still tapped softly through the halls of the Academy each morning, marking the same even rhythm he had always known. But now, that sound meant something new. It meant a man walking forward, not away.